So we're starting off with gender and educational attainment, and this is the third subtopic that you see over here. That is gender and subcultures. This is what we would be discussing today. And while we talk about gender and the subcultures that are formed on the basis of gender that consequently affect our educational attainment at schools, which now when we use the word subcultures, a subculture is a culture within a culture. So we're talking about subcultures being formed within the school, which might be pro school, or which might be anti school, or which are also referred to as counter school subcultures. These subcultures being formed on the basis of gender, to what extent do you think these subcultures affect the educational attainment of pupils? Now, to help ourselves understand this, there are a couple of researches or sociological references that I would like to bring in under discussion today. To begin with, if we talk about the study that was conducted by Dr. Michael Ward. Now, Dr. Michael Ward, he conducted his research in 2015. And if we talk about this particular research, he collected his data from young working class individuals. To begin with, young working class individuals. This research was conducted on males, and they were picked up from a deindustrialized community in South Wales. It's on your discretion. You want to write this down, you write it. You don't want to write this down, you might as well remove this too. Now, about Michael Ward, Dr. Michael Ward, he spent good 2.5 years. So this gentleman spent 2.5 years So Ward spent 2.5 years following the educational and social lives of 32 young men. How many males were there? If you talk about the number, there were 32 in total. His research was based on how, now if you talk about data collection techniques, how is it that this gentleman was collecting his data? This particular gentleman was collecting his data through number one, participant observations. I mean, even if you don't want to learn this knowing all of this would help you scrutinize these different researches better. So semi-structured interviews along with unstructured interviews. And he had several conversations with individuals as well, not in a very formal setting though, with individuals as well as groups. So Michael Ward, it is a research conducted on young working class males who were from a deindustrialized community. Now, what do we mean when we use this term deindustrialized community over here? You know, when there was a time when industrialization, there was a time when there were a lot of manufacturing units, there were a lot of industries, a lot of factories, and having a lot of factories and having a lot of industries around means individuals from the working class, they would have more of opportunity, they'd have more of a chance to work and work and earn. But of course, if you talk about a deindustrialized community, that in other words means the chances of these working class individuals being able to work and earn over here would reduce, which if you remember from ASU at start, you must have studied the crisis of masculinity. Now, deindustrialization means a lot of unemployment. Deindustrialization in this context means individuals from the working class might not have a lot of job opportunities once their through with their education. So this study provides evidence to suggest that deindustrialization and the decline of traditional manual jobs had led working class boys to place a higher value in education and to progress further, and sometimes higher education too. So if we talk about this research a little further, if we're talking about this research a little further, we over here are referring to how this deindustrialization, and contrary to what the typical expectations are, in deindustrialization, how this deindustrialization had actually led to the working class boys placing higher education on higher value, giving higher value, or placing higher value to education. So these young working class boys placing higher value to education. This is what we'd be discussing here today. Now, when we talk about deindustrialization, if I may compare this with the study that was conducted by Paul Willis, if you recall, the infamous study that was conducted by Paul Willis when he wrote his book in 1977. The name of the book was Learning to Labor. If you recall, according to Paul Willis, these working class boys, he had referred to them as lads. These young lads, they had very little interest in educational qualification. These young boys were they actually formed a counter school subculture. There were these 12 boys in total who had formed a counter school culture. They were not interested in academics. They would spend their time having a laugh. They would misbehave with other fellow students who were studious, whom they refer to as the year olds. They would misbehave with teachers, and they were racist, they were sexist, and they were not what Ward is trying to explain us over here. So when we talk about the study that was conducted by Ward in the year 2015. Okay, another thing that I want you guys to note over here is Paul Willis' study was conducted in 1977. I mean, he wrote his book in 1977. However, the study that was conducted by Michael Ward, this is from 2015. So, taking this ahead, this study that was conducted by Ward challenges the traditional working class culture of masculinity. And unlike the lads in the study from Paul Willis, they had no available manual jobs in which they had to express this form of masculinity. Now, what he found out was, according to Ward, he divided these young boys, since it was an all male sample comprising of 32 individuals. He divided these young boys into two groups. To name them the boys. Yes, this is exactly how you spell this. That these were pretty similar to the lads from Paul Willis' study. Do not confuse this. And number two, the geeks. Now we're talking about two distinctively different groups over here. The first one being the boys, which were pretty similar to the lads, and number two, the geeks over here, two categories. Now, when we talk about these boys at school, they continued to enact the more traditional forms of working class masculinity. These young boys, they tended to take male subjects such as physical education, motor vehicle studies, and A levels in math, science, electronics, and business. These young boys, they were boisterous. If you're done writing the initial part, if I talk about the boys over here, Boiz. They were very boisterous. Or in other words, they were noisy, they were energetic, full of energy, etc. They would they were disruptive towards the lessons, and they were more interested in having a laugh, just like the lads did in the study that was conducted by Paul Willis back in the 1970s. Now, despite of this particular behavior being witnessed at school, what Ward concluded was, what he figured out was, one third of these boys, that makes it four members in total out of 12, went on to university. So if these young boys, they went to the university, shows us that they this shows us that these young boys did value education, did value higher education. Now, in the leisure time, these boys, they follow traditional activities of young working class males. These boys, they usually used to look down on the geeks as well. We might as well add that down, looked down on the geeks. They saw the geeks as effeminate, which in other words means, I mean, let's just say feminine in this context. On the other hand, if we talk about the geeks here, these geeks were studious, they were the quiet ones, they were well behaved, they followed school rules. Outside school, these geeks would read books, write poetry, play computer games, maybe. Now, if you have a closer look at this shows a very starking contrast between these two groups. And remember, these boys were from a working class background. It's pretty important that you remember that all of these boys were from a working class background. So on one extreme, we have the boys, and boiz. These boys were boisterous, they were disruptive towards lessons, they would uh, spend the time having a laugh, they would look down on the geeks, they saw the geeks as pretty feminine as well. And on the other hand, this group, again, let me reiterate, this second group, that is the geeks, comprised of working class individuals too. These young boys, they were studious, they were quiet, they were well behaved, they followed rules, and outside school, they would keep themselves occupied with reading books, playing games, writing poetry, so on and so forth. Now, about these young boys, that is the geeks in this case, I'd like to save myself some space here. These young boys, according to Michael Ward, they looked forward to escaping from their working class community. Remember, they were from the working class as well, and taking middle class jobs. Remember, middle class jobs means higher social status, more of prestige, privileges. Now, what is trying to, I just wait for you all to copy this down just in case. You might as well take a screenshot of this if you want. Now, taking this ahead, what Ward noted was, what Ward's analysis was, that these two groups, these boys from these two young these two groups of young boys from a similar background, the same gender, they saw the changes, or they rather say they adapted to industrialization in different ways. Both groups adapted to deindustrialization in different ways. Such as the boys and the geeks, the boys continued maintaining with their traditional working class masculine identity, whereas the geeks, they changed from their traditional they brought in a change from their traditional working class masculine identity to a desire for a new middle class identity. Now, do you understand the difference here? We're talking about two groups being formed on the basis of how these young boys from a very similar background, how they adapted to deindustrialization, or how did deindustrialization affect these two groups. Now, the boys, they continued with their traditional working class identities, even though it is important to remember that one third of them did go to university, did go to university. We cannot miss on that part. Whereas if you talk about the geeks, they were ready to bring in more of a change. And these geeks, these young boys, again from the same working class background, they were ready to change their traditional masculine identities in a desire, because they had this desire for a new middle class identity, a new middle class identity that would have gained them a status, a better socioeconomic status rather, which would have again led to these young boys having highly paid jobs. They would have had that prestige, the privilege, the privileges that the privileges that the middle class individuals have. So this is what Mr. Ward had concluded. According to him, that even when you talk about deindustrialization, it doesn't necessarily mean that deindustrialization would affect everyone in the same manner. Even when it is about deindustrialization, there were different groups that eventually emerged as a reaction to deindustrialization. On one end, there was this one group who continued being the way they were. Some of them, a few, I mean, one third, if it's to be considered significant, they went to they emphasized on the high value that education could have played in their future success in life, and they did go to university. However, on the other hand, this extremely opposite group, that is the geeks, they changed from the traditional working class masculine identity towards a desire for a new middle class identity. And this new middle class identity would have helped them with gaining a better socioeconomic status, a highly paid job, and a lot of prestige and privilege that a working class job might not have offered them. Now, if we try scrutinizing the study that was conducted by Ward, evaluation of Ward's study. So if we evaluate this study that was conducted by Michael Ward, he Michael Ward claimed that these working class boys, at least some of them, they had moved away from the so-called crisis of masculinity. What he's trying to suggest is that at least to some extent, the traditional working class identities can coexist with educational success. Now, this is an example of what I'm talking about over here. Let's just say in some cases, it wouldn't be wrong for us to believe that the working class traditional working class masculine identities, they can coexist. The word we're using over here is coexist. They could coexist with educational success too. It worked well for at least one third of them. So we could conclude this by saying that the working class individuals, the lads from the study that was the lad from the study that was conducted by Paul Willis, they have moved to a newer and a refined version of what do you call it, boys, and the year olds to the geeks. So if we're trying to evaluate the study that was conducted by Ward, the first thing, let's give credit to Mr. Ward for thinking out of the box over here, and him emphasizing on or working on or trying to figure out the extent to which the crisis of masculinity the extent to which this crisis of masculinity, or rather say, let me form it into a sentence, moved away from the typical focus. I think I'd have to remove the entire thing from the typical focus on crisis of masculinity. That is usually how many sociologists see it. But Mr. Ward, he moved a little away from that, and he tried looking into a matter which otherwise was not really taken into account. This gentleman, Michael Ward, he noted a change. According to him, the chances that the chances that the traditional masculine working class identities being able to coexist with educational success are always there. One, I mean, I could just coexistence of, of traditional masculine working class identities with educational success. The word coexistence over here should matter. One. Number two, what he has concluded is that the lads, I mean, this is something that you all might have noted at the first place when we were starting this as well. The lads and ear rolls from Paul Willis's study from 1977, Learning to Labor, have adapted. So the key word over here is this adaptation. Now, I just wait for you all to take a note on this. Okay, so along with Michael Ward, there's this another research by Archer, and this has to do with Muslim boys. And let me just drag this here. Muslim boys and education. How these Muslim boys saw themselves, how they saw schooling, how they saw their future. So this is again a very interesting study that was conducted in the year 2013, and I would want to discuss this study in another lesson. Along with this study, there was this another study that was conducted by Professor Alexandra Allen, which again I would want to keep for another lesson. I'm just mentioning them here so that you all know what still needs to be covered under this heading. And this was a 2 year study. And this uh, lady Alexandra Allen, this she is a faculty member at the University of Cambridge. Again, there's this another study on British Asian girls, and this study was conducted by Farzana Shane. Farzana Shane conducted her research in the year 2010, and this research focused on British Asian girls. And yeah, so these three references, we still have to discuss them uh, probably in another lesson. And so we were talking about the relationship between your gender. Uh, we were talking about the relationship between your gender and the extent to which your gender plays an important role in terms of the formation of subcultures at school. And these formation of subcultures, of course, affect the experiences, the overall experiences an individual has during their schooling years. Initially, we spoke about the study that was conducted by Dr. Michael Ward, which we were able to discuss in detail. And after this, there are three more references rather that I would like to bring in under discussion. The first study by Archer, the second by Allen, and third by Sheen. And we'd be able to do this in another lesson. I hope this was helpful. Thank you.